Buenos días, muchas gracias por la presentación. Yo no tengo palabras para agradecer la oportunidad de estar aquí, de conocervos y principalmente de poder compartir las mías experiencias como científica y la transición de mi laboratorio académico para el mundo de business, construyendo mi empresa y principalmente como emprendedora. Pero lo siento que yo voy a hablar en inglés porque yo sé solamente 4 verbos que son importantes: desarrollar, hacer, invertir, planear, y un quinto que también es muy importante como emprendedora, que es fracasar. Por lo tanto, para que no hablemos solamente con 5, yo le voy a hablar en inglés. Bueno, so today I'm going to actually, the 2 themes of my talk are going to be, first, sharing these experiences, the learnings and the challenges that I've had personally as a faculty member at University of Wisconsin with a research program in human embryonic stem cells and starting my own firm, biotech firm, with the research that I did in my lab. And you're going to see it's quite a happy story, I would say, because I'll show you the first paper that we published on the research and then how we were privileged to transition that research from my academic lab into a clinical trial that is being enrolled today by the FDA. So it's the first clinical trial in autistic children, which is a very challenging pediatric clinical trials. The pediatric studies are always very challenging, and you're going to see this is just a part of the story. And then the second part of my talk will be really to give you some examples and the work that I'm doing today in creating opportunities for molecules, biologics, processes, technologies discovered here in our region, in Latin America, and taking them to the global market. That's exactly what I do. That is exclusively what we do. So she mentioned in the introduction, until last year, I was actually the head of Pfizer's external research, development, innovation team for the whole Latin America and South Africa. And I made a very difficult decision last year, which was to leave Pfizer, entrepreneur once again, to start my own company. My mother didn't talk to me for about 2 months. She still doesn't understand what we do. You know, how could somebody leave that job? But it's yet another challenge, and I think that is one of the key messages here. Once you have that entrepreneurial spirit, it never goes away. And even inside Pfizer, as you're going to see, we did some revolutionary projects. One of them was the first precision medicine center of Latin America. So I actually took a research project that was going to be done in the US for next-gen sequencing, and we transferred the whole program here to Latin America. So the center is in Santiago with subsidiary work in Brazil, some collaborators here. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So, oops, can you go back? No, don't show the sheep. Okay, there. So essentially, as I said, what we do today is enable, create, and deliver partnerships for biopharmaceutical and biotechnology companies here in Latin America and also in other growth markets. We create and deliver those partnerships with multiple global companies, not only multinationals, but also institutions, and we attract investors. The reason I decided to leave Pfizer and start this new business is essentially because we understand that Latin America is ready for the global market. There are assets here, which I'm going to give a few examples, that are in high demand. We are positioned to participate in global portfolios. There is no question about that. And we felt there was not a specific institution that was able to intermediate or to streamline, and so that's what we do. So on the one side, we have companies here that are committed to innovation with assets, as I mentioned, preclinical or clinical stage assets that are ready to partner. We've spent millions of dollars, both public dollars and private dollars, here in Argentina and Brazil and Chile, and some of those assets need to be de-risked. What do I mean by that? They need to be subject to proof of concept, mechanism of action, in a way that is acceptable to regulatory authorities worldwide. In other words, we want a molecule discovered here in Argentina to walk through the door of any multinational, like any molecule discovered in the United States, because there's no difference, okay? Innovation has no borders, so that's the work that we do. On the other side, what we have is we have a significant change in the pharmaceutical industry itself, which is my main focus on human health care. So if you look at what has happened at Pfizer, GSK, Novartis, just to give a few examples, Johnson & Johnson with Janssen, all of these companies have significantly reduced their internal R&D. What does that mean? That means this is the time to get your companies to partner and to put your assets to serve patients around the world. It's very important to clarify that we're not talking about Argentinian companies being bought by multinationals. No. It's about creating co-development opportunities and just, in fact, excuse my language, but really using and leveraging the global distribution resources of these partners to get your therapies to patients all over the world, and with royalties and revenues to local companies. So this is really, it's a strategy about globalizing assets and generating revenues for companies here with global partnerships. So that's what we do. Next slide, if you can. There. So today, as I mentioned, I'm going to share some of my learnings as I transition from a bench scientist to investment management and business development and starting my own company, and then give an example of a few growth opportunities where we see critical growth opportunities for companies, biotechnology companies in Latam. Next slide, please. Yeah, I don't think it's there. So just a little bit about my background. I was a scientist for many years in the pharmaceutical industry at Pharmacia and Pfizer. I've actually had 3 careers at Pfizer. I was a bench scientist, then I left to become faculty at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I had an NIH-funded research program on human embryonic stem cells. I started my own biotechnology company, and that's the story I'm going to tell you next, and then transitioned into venture capital. So I had the honor to lead the fundraising of the first biotechnology venture capital fund in Brazil. We raised $120 million with private investors from abroad. With Pfizer, that was second. I left Pfizer and they still invested in my fund. And they offered a job again afterwards. So with Pfizer, Thermo Fisher, and institutional investors in Brazil, which I think is a very important model, especially for Argentina. We were here back in 2007, 2008, attempting for a similar strategy, a VC fund, even engaging, as you're going to see in Brazil. We actually were able to attract pension funds to a biotechnology fund. So that was the first time a pension fund, a state pension fund, invested in biotechnology. We're going to talk about that a little bit. And then most recently, as we mentioned, I was head of Pfizer. This is an article that came out in Forbes when I was a scientist. Yes? Yes, please, thank you. So this is a story that was featured in Forbes, I believe back in 2009, when they did a story, a cover story about stem cells and stem cell mavericks. And our research was privileged to be included in that, and I have to say, the only woman. They appointed 10 stem cell revolutionaries. I was the only woman. Next slide, please. So here are how I began my career. As I mentioned, a scientist in stem cell research and cloning and cell reprogramming for about 11 years. That's Dolly the sheep there on the top right. I actually worked in the team that cloned Dolly the sheep in Scotland at Roslin Institute. And then I don't know if you can tell what's going on in the bottom picture there. I was not in jail. I'm actually a veterinarian, a cattle, large animal veterinarian. So I have been working with colleagues here in Argentina since I grew up, because my dad was one of the founders of Embrapa, the Brazilian research agriculture organization. He was one of the founders, like 003. So we've spent many times with colleagues here in Argentina in doing field work. That's me palpating a cow, actually. So I spent a significant amount of my time in the lab. That's one of the pictures that I found yesterday. It was so refreshing. That was my lab, postdocs, PhD students. But I always had an interest. In fact, when I decided to take an academic job, to be honest, when I interviewed, I told the dean, I was a scientist at Pfizer, Wisconsin was recruiting me. My dream was to work on human embryonic stem cells. It was the Bush administration. I said, I'll go, but only if I can start a company. Who interviews for a faculty position with the dean and says, I will come, I will leave the multinational to be a faculty only if I can start a company? Wisconsin is so amazing. The university has entrepreneurship as one of its pillars. In fact, it is the school, the university, that has the third largest investment of healthcare dollars from the NIH, from the Ministry of Health in the US. So that culture, and this is key, I would say, to extrapolate here, that entrepreneurial culture and the ability to translate your discoveries in the lab into companies is so rooted in Wisconsin that I felt very comfortable telling the dean that I would only take the job if I could start my company. He said, fine, okay. So then from there, next slide, please. I published multiple papers, was able to secure NIH funding, and with the research that I did in my lab, I actually founded a company called Stamina in Madison, Wisconsin. And my research and the core platform of the company is essentially around metabolomics of human embryonic stem cells. So contrary, I've always been very much on the opposite side of the road. So when everybody was using stem cells and doing research for cell therapy, I actually looked at human embryonic stem cells as a source of small molecules, so potential diagnostic molecules. So I mapped what human embryonic stem cells were secreting. As you're going to see, the reason why we're in the clinic today in the US with a candidate diagnostic for autism is that I made an in vitro model of autism, so differentiated human embryonic stem cells into human brain, exposed them to compounds that are known to induce autism. Women that are pregnant, I don't know if you know, when women are pregnant, women that are epileptic have to remain on an anti-epileptic called valproic acid, and about 5% of the children born to those pregnancies are autistic. So in the same exact manner as children that were not exposed to VPA during pregnancy. So we use that as a bona fide disruptor of neurodevelopment. So that's the first paper that we published back in 2007 from my lab. And then here is the announcement last year of Stamina actually launching its first and the largest clinical study in children with autism in the US. Next slide, thank you. Same, there we go. So the company is centered, this is not to talk, it's not about the company, I want you to think the research that you're doing in your labs today and what patents you have. So this is, we actually translated, we licensed my own patents I created the company. In Brazil, this would be like, any university would not accept that very well. I actually started a company with the patents that I developed in my own academic laboratory, and we paid for them. So we have an exclusive license to that intellectual property. I actually invited one of the lawyers, the IP lawyers, who filed those patents from WARF. She's the CEO of the company today, Beth Donnelly. She was general counsel at WARF, the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation. So I brought one of the colleagues from the tech transfer office to do the company with me. And we have two core technologies, two businesses. One is a preclinical safety toxicology, so looking at determining developmental toxicity or the ability of pharmaceutical chemicals to induce birth defects. We use in vitro assays, that's part of the IP portfolio. And we've been very privileged to secure commercial contracts. These are the commercial contracts, they're in the public domain, so as you can see, multiple pharmaceutical companies, but very importantly, the U.S. Environment Protection Agency. So the U.S. federal agency, EPA, has a commercial contract with the company for $10 million of revenues for the company. $10 million using pure innovation, an in vitro platform on human embryonic stem cells to screen for the toxicity of environmental chemicals. So you can do it. That is one of the business units. The second business unit is a diagnostic business unit, and this is the one that we're launching the clinical study. We're actually recruiting 1,500 children. We're in the middle of the study, and it all started, it's interesting, here's another learning. When we founded the company, we started from cell culture to patients. That was my dream. As you saw in the former logo, it says, from cell culture to patients. So I always dreamed as a scientist, that I would be able to discover molecules in the dish from cell culture and translate that, and that's exactly what happened. So the green picture are actually human neurons, human brain, differentiated from human embryonic stem cells, where we discovered the molecules, and then above that, the actual NCT, the clinical study locator from clinicaltrials.gov. The raising of the fund, as I mentioned, and then really what our work is focusing on today, which is how important our emerging or growth markets are for global innovation. Here are my partners. Fred Craves is the founder of Bay City Capital, Carl Goldfisher, managing director. Bay City is one of the most prestigious venture capital groups in the US. They have about 1.3 billion in committed capital, but most importantly, Fred and Carl have been able, and the whole group, develop more than 100 biotech companies with an exceptional track record of success. Meaning what? What is success? From an investor's perspective, a large number of those companies have undergone an initial public offering, and they're today listed in NASDAQ, like Dermira, for example. They were one of the first investors in Ion Torrent. So if I was able to secure these people as my partners, and I only work with Latin American biotechnology companies, I don't think I have to say how much interest there is, right, to start working here and to secure pathways for innovation from Argentina and from our region to reach patients around the world. Here are some of our partners. And then I wanted to give just a few highlights, because a lot of people say, yes, yeah, everybody says there's innovation here, but where is it? Yes, our science is exceptional. I hope there are no Brazilians here, because Argentine, your science is better than, I'm Brazilian. Your science is, you've published in Nature, you have 3 Nobel Prizes, you publish in Nature on a regular basis, so your science is already leading science, no different than any MIT or Harvard or what have you. But so when I say, and when I left everything to say there is value, there are assets there that are ready to serve, people say, where? all these studies, everything looks beautiful, right? We all have our economic development initiatives. And like Hugo mentioned before, what was done in Brazil was extraordinary. And I will say that we participated in one of those transactions. The Brazilian government used their buying power, and they made a multinational like us, Pfizer, literally transfer technology, right? So it's extraordinary. But this is what I want to highlight some of the facts. So we are in a position, and as Hugo mentioned previously, there have been significant programs here in the region to attract and to solidify this ecosystem for innovation, including specific policies, government policies like Inova Saúde that was done in Brazil, the PDPs in Chile. And I want to talk specifically, here's just a few highlights. So from 2009 to 2015, this is just what I've been able to work on directly. So independent of Pfizer, even before I came back to Pfizer, I've been able to raise and to commit and to invest $500 million in this region. So yes, there is substrate and there is a global need. So here's one of the programs that I'm very much proud of, which is the pioneer work, the First Precision Medicine Center of Excellence, that I said we actually brought a whole research program. And I don't like technology I say, don't give Latin America a research project with technology from 1985. No. This is state of the art. This is NGS, next-gen sequencing, state-of-the-art genomics platform. Okay, we transitioned the whole program to Latin America. Not only did we put a lot of money, Pfizer, it's a $22 million program, but I also brought another multinational, made them also contribute, Thermo Fisher. And it was in Nature, biotechnology. It was featured in Nature. And Michelle Bachelet, there she is, that's a transcript of one of her pronunciations on TV talking about the program. So just to close, I would just like to show some of the highlights. A few highlights. I did not include companies in Argentina on purpose, so we wouldn't include, I'm sure that we have many more. If I can be invited next year again, please. I'll only talk about Argentina. That's my placeholder, gracias, please. Mi portuñol estará bien mejor. So here's some of the highlights. That these are assets that are receiving considerable attention from multinational companies. Algenist is a company in Chile that has a clinical stage asset called NavX10. It's actually completed its phase 1 in the US, so it's FDA IND, investigational new drug, approved for a very important indication called chronic anal fissure. I wasn't aware. This is an indication, this is a disorder that affects about 4 million Americans a year with a very significant market need, around $600 to $800 million. And they have a very innovative asset, which was actually isolated from algae. So this is a neurotoxin isolated from the algae in Patagonia that caused the red tide. And they're a sodium channel. The compound actually is a sodium channel blocker and has exhibited very significant efficacy for this unmet medical need. This is such an unmet medical need that Orbimed, which is another prominent venture capital firm, has invested in a company in Israel called RDD. There's a battle to find a therapy for chronic anal fissure. This is a devastating, painful condition on the VAS pain scale, which is 1 to 10. These patients are average 8. And what is it? I had to educate myself about this market. So this is prevalent in pregnant women, end of pregnancy, women, mostly women with severe constipation, and also as a comorbidity of autoimmune GI disorders like Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome. Okay, that's one example. Another example, Biolab is a company in Brazil, has its own new molecule, a new novel antifungal. I don't know, this is how much this is needed. The FDA and President Obama actually signed an accelerated pathway for anti-infectives. Why? Because over the past 5 to 10 years, the large pharmaceutical companies have disinvested or deprioritized research in anti-infectives, what's happening now? We have resistance, right? So there's a GAIN Act at the FDA that actually grants any new molecules, antibiotics and antifungals, it gives them accelerated review and 5 more years of market exclusivity. So this company here in Latin America has an asset, that's the asset on the first row, it's called dapaconazole, compared to all the currently marketed assets. And in the bottom line is VFEND, voriconazole, and you can see which has been the standard of care for severe fungal infections in immunosuppressed, immunocompromised patients. And this asset, discovered here, developed here, is more potent than the asset discovered and that has been the standard of care in the United States and globally. Okay, so yes, our discoveries can reach and are needed by the global market. The last one I will show is a candidate asset. This one has for vitiligo. Vitiligo, severe depigmentation. It's actually interesting. We here are very familiar with vitiligo, right? In the US, when I talk to colleagues about vitiligo, they just keep looking at me like, I go, vitiligo, the depigmentation. So interestingly, Europe is different, but in the United States, that awareness of vitiligo, despite the fact that, you know, Michael Jackson, their celebrity, underwent the whole, you know, chemical depigmentation for vitiligo. So this is another very important $1.3 billion market, unmet medical need, and we have an asset, which is a first-in-class for vitiligo as a candidate therapy. There's nothing. In countries like India, for example, unfortunately, this is a disease with such devastating quality of life alterations that patients commit suicide. And here is a candidate in oral therapy discovered here in Latin America, developed here in Latin America. You can see the outcomes of a pilot clinical study with important and significant ability to induce repigmentation. This is an autoimmune disease, so the mechanism of the is actually at the pathogenesis of autoimmune, because your CD8 positive T cells destroy melanocytes. So these, trust me when I tell you, these molecules have received significant attention from the global market, and we hope that by next year, I hope you'll invite me again, that we will tell you how those stories ended. So just my last slide, just for the companies and the investigators here that are seeking to partner, where do you start? Gracie, do I have 2 more minutes? Okay. So where do you start? Most of the large pharmaceutical companies, the US biotech companies, they do have partnering websites, but what I would recommend is first and foremost for these partnerships, and this is, as I said, this is what we do every day, so I'm just sharing some of those learnings, is strategic alignment. Companies change their direction of research not only according to internal restructuring and acquisitions, but also market trends, right? So what's hot? What is hot right now? And things that I've seen research here in Argentina for a long time, and it's one of the hottest areas in the market: gene therapy, cancer vaccines, immuno-oncology. Microbiome. Microbiome is our microbiology from the 70s and the 80s. They just put a fancy name on it, just like metabolomics is really biochemistry 101 to the 10th power. So microbiome, right? Engineering monoclonal antibodies. So first and foremost, it's critical to have strategic or commercial alignment and to seek internal champions and to prepare a non-confidential executive summary and a business plan to be presented to these partners. Non-confidential, companies will not sign a CDA unless they are really interested. So don't be afraid to share information. The legal teams are extraordinary. These companies are not, trust me, they're not going to steal your intellectual property. There's so much liability at stake that if I'm just sharing my opinion, I would share as much as you can. And then what are the two most critical considerations for our assets to reach global markets? Mechanism of action. Period. Period. Mechanism of action. You have to demonstrate. One of the things that I often see, I've been working with our companies here for more than 10 years, is we have extraordinary ideas, innovation, but sometimes, I'm going to be completely honest, the quality of our validation suffers. Then what happens? We generate one piece of the validation in one lab, the other piece at another university, the other piece at another institution. Please, please, let's try. Think about it this way. Every time you're submitting your opportunity or your company, we are looking at companies from MIT, UCSF. Your science is the same quality as MIT, UCSF. So if at all possible, I would suggest any investments from grants, investment from seed funding, venture capital, please spend at CROs that have a track record or that are at least GLP, because otherwise that money is just going to go, we're going to have to redo them, we're going to have to repeat them, and you're going to lose the market opportunity. Okay, so think about it this way. Is the data that I'm generating, could it be included in the dossier as the preclinical data? If the answer is yes, if no, fundraise, call us, just try, because it'll save money, save time, and then there's no question. When I was at Pfizer, this is the last thing I'll say, gracias. When I was at Pfizer, they gave me this job to launch R&D in Latin America, and we started working with our universities and companies, and I would think, who am I competing with? Even inside Pfizer, the new molecules that I bring from Latin America, my colleague down the hall is bringing new molecules from Stanford. So the innovation is there. It's just process, okay? We just have to fine-tune our process. Intellectual property, as you know, is the currency of biotechnology. So needless to say, important focus on that. So with that, I would like to close and just remind you that we are positioned to maximize the value of innovation. We need to transition. I think from our agriculture, I was going to say Brazilian beef is better than Argentinian, but I'll not reserve that comment. We should transition from our commodity-based economy, not reduce, right? We are going to be the providers of food for the world, period, nowhere else. But we should really address and use this time now to create those high-paying jobs and to leverage the knowledge that we have into an innovation-based economy. Everybody is doing it, right? South Korea, Singapore, so we have to be at the forefront. Hopefully, I can help you in any way that I can. Thank you very much for the opportunity.